Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Leger Fernandez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, basically, the Republican attack on NEPA is part of their larger effort to dictate from D.C. what should be happening locally. They want to dictate from D.C. their desire for more fossil fuel projects, even though the American public wants more renewable energy to meet America's growing energy demands. Their changes to NEPA would destroy community input. Remember, NEPA is indeed a process bill. It encourages and requires coordination with tribes, local communities, scientists, environmentalists, conservations, but also, in my district, farmers and ranchers. Before you undertake projects that could destroy sacred sites, pollute your water, or ruin your farm or a sequoia system. And that's the kind of input we want to encourage. As Mr. Mergen just testified, the local community has a lot of great ideas and we want to be able to input them. They enter into negotiations as part of this process. But what Republicans are doing is eliminating that input from the local communities in negotiations. Today's hearing is no different than last night's hearing before the Rules Committee, where Republicans were proposing 3 bills to overturn resource management plans. In Alaska, it was a resource management plan that had been worked out over years through lots of negotiation, right? Years of negotiation and give and take on what should we have in this resource management plan, local input, local negotiations, dictating from DC. The Rules Committee was considering a bill that 7 days after it was introduced, they were going to overturn that resource management plan. Now, that bill isn't going to be heard because Democrats had a motion to require the disclosure of the Epstein files. That would have been heard in rules, but Republicans are so afraid of voting to release the Epstein files that they canceled the rule. There was no rule issued, and there will not be a vote on those 3 bills this week. Basically, their fear of voting on the Epstein files shut down the Rules Committee and the regular order before this House. That's how afraid they are of the Epstein files. And in some ways, it seems that they are also afraid of community input. So, you know, we've talked a little bit on this committee about how the fact that there has been progress made, you know, response times are about basically in half, but they're understaffing everything. And if you understaff, in New Mexico, in my region, there is nobody to actually review the permits. That's going to put everything back even further. But Mr. Hergott, I heard you state earlier that this committee should codify the 7 counties' decision to clarify that environmental impact statements should only include proximal impacts and impacts that directly result from a project's activity. So do you agree that greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change are a direct result of producing and transporting fossil fuels?
I think that NEPA requires that you look at direct and indirect impacts based on what the statutes say, and currently that is not required.
So the question was, do you agree that fossil fuels, the transportation, the development, and the burning of fossil fuels drives climate change? That was the question.
I'm not a scientist to make that determination, but I will tell you it does increase emissions. It reduces emissions on rail, but that's not the substance of making a substantive decision about the science of an emission or the amount of a discharge is for the federal practitioners that are actually pushing the substantive values through the process. What I am talking about is...
So the question was whether fossil fuel development, emission, transportation, and burning addresses climate change. It appears you're trying to not answer the question.
No, it increases CO2 and pollutants. It absolutely does. It does.
It does, right? And so then we should include that in this, and it's not included in this NEPA process.
But that makes a jump
But
to
the-
anthropogenic climate change and oscillations in the environment and all sorts of things that are not a direct location of that project. So unless you change the rule about cumulative impacts and
Well,
global
then
climate
we should
emissions.
change the rule, because this is something that is impacting everybody, especially if you're in a drought-prone area where we either have disasters. The last question I wanted to ask
Nobody's stopping this
was-
committee from writing
The last question I
laws.
wanted to ask was to Mr. Mergen, was how can the United States be an energy-dominant country if we make it harder to build wind and solar in this country?
We can't.
My time is, I would follow up, but my time has expired, and so I yield back.
Lady